My name is Benktesh Sharma. I am going to talk about implementing AsyncTask in Android. We use asynchronous processing in Android to offload long-running tasks from UI thread to background thread. This is essential when we are calling database or network-related queries. And that way we can keep the UI thread interactive or unblocked. And also, Android by default doesn't allow UI thread to do the background processing. So AsyncTask in Android is implemented via an abstract class, and we have to make a concrete implementation of those async tasks. And this task usually overrides one or most often two methods. And then I'll go over how to override those, and there are some parameters which are tedious to get started for the first time, but once you get the gist of it, it's fairly simple. And one thing we need to note that the async task when executed are not aware of what is happening around until after the processing is complete and the UI thread has to pick it up. So we can cancel the executed async task using cancellation token, but this is not really suitable for long running that takes hours to complete. So to make a small network calls, async task is really suitable. And async task is not the only choice to do the asynchronous processing. We have intent services, loader, and job schedulers, and many Java-based implementation that we can make. The code that I'm going to demonstrate is from one of my nanodegree capstone project with Android nanodegree program. And I have created a lightweight version into this gist, and a lot of resources are available in Android developers page. So in this developer page, we can see the async task is an abstract class, and it must be a subclass, and the subclass will override at least one method, and we generally override second method too. And there are 4 steps to do the asynchronous processing using async task in Android. The first one is pre-execute, which is invoked on the UI thread before the task is executed. We use this step to do some conditional checking or updating UI and so on. Once the pre-execute completes, the process goes to do in background method, and then the background process, once complete, will trigger the on post-execute method. And async task can also be used to update the progress using onProgress. So this is a main activity. This main activity just sets up the UI. The UI, once updated, once set up, will call the LoadView. I'm implementing the recycle view using adapters. If you are not familiar with adapters on recycle view, what I'm going to say right now is adapter is an object that holds the data that will eventually be populated. Using asynchronous processing, we update those data from the background thread, and that once the background thread completes, the UI is populated with the data that we want to load or visualize. So in this method, what I'm doing is, after the setup of the UI, I call this LoadView method. LoadView method then creates a new asynchronous async task with a network query task, and it executes with a parameter. Let's see what this network query task does. If I go to implementation of it, so it's extending the async task with the 3 parameters: string, integer, and array list of stock. Array list of stock is simply a Java class that holds the variable that I want to use. In this activity, I am using on pre-execute to make the spinner visible, so user will see something is happening. And once that on pre-execute completes, the thread goes to the do background process. Do in background process makes a call to network where it's using a utility that I have created, which get the stock data, passing the query. And then the results are saved into this search result. A background thread runs for the 4 times, and then every time it publishes the progress. What I'm saying is I times 25 is one call is 25% equal load. I just did that just to demonstrate how the published progress works. So published progress will invoke this on progress update, and it will create a toast message saying progress is completed. And this is a duration of short, so this published progress is invoked. A UI thread will show the progress bar. Once this is complete, it will return this search result, and then that on post execute method, it will check the result. If it is valid, then we should reset the adapter, so the UI will get the new data every time this call happens. And finally, once that's completed, the visibility is gone. So one thing to note in here is the parameters that we pass. The string is something that the do in background process takes. Integer is something that is on progress update takes, and array list of stock, which is the input of on post execute. Let's collapse that. So this data type is input to this, which is same as the output of do in background method. So let's try running this and see how it works. So the idea is network task is a subclass of the main activity, and this is called by using a simple new instantiation of network query task and calling the execute function and passing the parameter. Now once that's done, while the application is running here, we can see this spinner is spinning. It's saying something is happening. The good thing about it is now UI is not blocked, so I can do something in there and I can just get out of there, just to demonstrate that UI thread is not blocked because of this background processing. We noticed here the progress is being updated. This is basically first call happen, second call happen, third call happen, and the data finally should show up once the progress completes the 100%, so data is there. So that is essentially the gist of how the asynchronous processing works using AsyncTask in Android. Now, what I want to do is just illustrate a little bit more on these variables, the parameters that we pass. So we don't always have to use all these three parameters. Let's say, for example, we want to use a very lightweight version which doesn't take any parameter. In that case, I'm going to copy this code, the entire class, and paste it here. But now it will complain saying, hey, there are multiple methods, multiple class with the same name. So what I want to do is all void. So that is to say, I created a new method, new class, network query task, does the same thing, but it takes everything void. So what I want to do is I don't want to pass any parameter here. And let's get started with this. So when I say void void, the do in background process should not take any string parameter. It should only take void parameter. Now when it's a void, and the return type should also be void because the third parameter is void, so I have to change that to say this is void. So now that is okay. Now the problem is the return type is still the object of stock, list of stock, so I should say null. So this method is now valid. But the problem is this query now, we need a query to get this stock data. Let's see what it does in implementation. So it's taking the query, and based on that, it's making a decision what to do. So we need a valid query there. So for the query, I know I am going to use a market data. So in my application, this is market query. So now this method is valid. So what is happening here is we are doing the background processing, and then we are creating this search result, and then search result is there, but this is the third parameter is void, and it's on execute method, on post execute method is expecting a parameter of search results, so which is not valid anymore. So what we have to do is make it a void too. So I'm saying void, and let's say param param, and then do that. And this superclass, I just want to call it param, which is void. It's okay. And now the search result is saying I'm not accessible because this search result is within the scope of this do in background method. So we can move it a little further up in the class hierarchy so it's available. Now search result is there. Now whenever we make a call to network using in the do in background, search result is updated, and this should function as expected as long as we call this class. So the way to call this class is, now I want to go and comment out the old class and create a new, use the newer class where it takes all the void parameters. Let's run this and give it a try. Now, while it's running, what we did in this new implementation is we got rid of the two parameters to void, and our design is really using a placeholder for search result, which is populated by do in background and used by on post execute. So we don't necessarily have to use all the parameters in the way it is defined, and then everything should function just as before, except that we are not using those string parameters or so on. The async processing is just a design choice how you design it. Sometimes we may need a parameter, sometimes we may not, so progress is working fine. Finally, it should show the data in there. So that's the data it's working. Now, what we noticed here is on pre-execute method only is checking for a spinner. So if I don't need to override that, I can just copy it and put it in here, and I can get rid of that because that's all it does in there. And if I run it, I will still see spinner, and the progress update will function as before. And in the meantime, what I'm going to do is, let's say I don't want to do a progress update. So if I don't want to do progress update, then my options are I can use a void to update. So if I say void, now this function is complaining, hey, you said you defined the third parameter, the second parameter as void, but you are using int. So what I can do is void. And this works fine, but the published progress is expecting void. So either I can do this to satisfy the constraint, or now I'm not using any progress because I don't have a data to show the progress, so I can just disable it. When I do that, I'm not publishing any progress. If I'm not publishing any progress, there is no need to override this on progress update. So that's another way to deal with it. Let's see. Now what we will see is we will see a spinner, but no progress, and that's okay. So here we haven't seen any progress updates so far. Now, what we saw here is the search result got passed on to post execute, and then adapter was changed, and our data is loaded. So what we did was from overriding 4 methods, we did a 2 override. Now, if for some reason we didn't want to update the UI, then our on post execute method could have been just avoided or skipped. That was about my presentation. So if you have any questions, please put a comment on the video and I'll try to answer to those. Thank you for watching.